Can you train cows to use a toilet? I don't know, but we may find out. Also, what are ways that beef producers can make a profit while further reducing environmental impacts? Welcome to Hashknife Hangouts. I'm Kalen. He's Brandon. If this is your first time to the channel, like, comment, and subscribe. Also, look for us at the social media links below. But first, let's start with potty training cows. There's some scientists from Germany and New Zealand who conducted a study where they trained 16 calves to urinate in a specific area. They stated in an article that I read, and I can add the link below, in quotes, this could reduce the release of toxic gases that are harmful to the environment while simultaneously keeping farms cleaner and reducing animal infections. I think this is a key point because cattle can produce 8 gallons of urine and approximately 65 pounds of feces each day. Those were measurements provided in that article. Personally, I think the study gives too much credit to the intelligence of cattle because they stated that they are clever and can learn a lot. Let's start there. I got 4 other things. Actually, no, hold on, Dad. I got 3. Training was used while rewarding correct behavior with treats. Apparently 11 out of the 16 calves were trained within 10 to 15 sessions. This is about the same speed as a human toddler, according to the scientists. And their only really concern is what's the long-term retention? What's the likelihood of that? And then some of the stats they gave, capturing 80% of urine could lead to 56% reduction in ammonia emissions, which livestock industry is a primary contributor. The article stated that ammonia is also harmful to biological ecosystems. It can acidify land and water, causing nutrient and biodiversity imbalances while killing plants and animals. But moving forward, they plan to attempt training on a larger scale and seek how useful it can actually be in application while moving on to things like fecal matter, not just urine. So what do you think?
This is just another if you listen to what they said, what that statement was, is all about how bad they are, and this is how we're going to reduce their impact.
Yeah,
that's what it is. It's another way to wage war on beef. You want to talk about ammonia, the amount of ammonia? Look at chickens. What's the difference?
Is there a lot in the fecal matter that they provide?
Oh yeah, we never had chickens when you were little, so
no.
Punishment was to clean the chicken coop if you did something bad, or you were the low man on the totem pole and had never done anything bad, which was the case for moi all the time. Was you go from training horses and working these horses to all of a sudden, yeah, your grandmother says chicken coop needs to be cleaned. I'm doing real freaking work here, and then I get relegated to the chicken coop. And if you've ever walked into a chicken coop that's dirty, it is overwhelming. They're just like, oh my God, they reek, and it is ammonia smell. So yeah, there's less volume there. But one of my questions is, what do they teach in survival schools about hydration?
I mean, the first thing is find hydration as any source and use it as best as you possibly can to obtain that, to keep your body, because we're 70% water overall, probably even a little more than that, but we need water to survive. So they always push water before food, primarily food after that.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. You can go a long time without food. It hurts.
Yeah.
And you get weak and you get shaky and you get the whole sugar, imbalance, and you start going through ketoacidosis. You're going to start breaking down your own fats and then proteins. But what is a source of water when you can't find anywhere else?
It's urine, whether you do an ad hoc distillation or you use it right from the source. Yeah.
Drink it right out of it. That's right. So, and what is the one caveat to that? A healthy system in the first place.
Yeah, because I mean, you could if you have an infection or something,
right,
it could then become an issue later on. But yeah,
right. Now you can't sustain that because you can't continually just keep drinking your urine, because you're going to get less and less so, because you're using it through homeostasis in just your body.
There were cases in World War II where Japanese soldiers were dug into cave systems and they were doing that, and they started drinking blood because that's all they could
Oh, yeah.
urinate. Yeah.
Oh, so yeah. So I mean, those are desperate measures. Now,
Mhm.
is an animal's urine any different on a healthy system than, say, humans? I mean, you get some biological or biodiverse systems. You know, they're a herbivore
Right.
versus we're omnivore. So to me, I would think, you know, having a clean source of water to begin with, which keeps them healthy, is that really that detrimental?
I guess, what do you mean by that? Can you
Well,
break that
well,
down?
what I'm saying is, okay, yeah, you can find all kinds of things in cow urine. You get ammonias, and that's mainly what they're talking about, right? Was the biggest one.
The ammonia,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, that's they're grasping onto something that is it an issue? Is it really a problem? I've been in some dairies where, you know, they're not total confined, but dairies also in hog operations that are total confinement on the hogs, and they have a pit in which these hogs are on slats that when they urinate, defecate, it goes between the slats and into this pit, and then they just suck the pit out with a regular vac truck like they do, you know, your
Septic system
local
or something like that.
septic system, yeah, and they go and they spread that on fields for fertilizer. So, and I've seen the result of that, taking a crested wheat hay field that really doesn't have much production on it. It was, you know, because in our country it's um, all weather dependent, like we talk about every day. Pardon me, but they've spread that urine fecal soup, and it really is. It's like a dirty soup, and spread it on those hay fields, and the production went through the roof. Your
Yeah,
grandpa did that for a guy.
I believe
So
that
how
because I thought,
detrimental is that?
that was my thought as well. Was you hear of things like, is it a ammonium nitrate, stuff like that? Like in
Gunpowder?
ammonium nitrate. Well, there some of that is used in actual
Yeah,
fertilizer though
yeah,
for
yeah.
big crops. So I was thinking that in itself, it's obviously a slightly different chemical compound for that, but the basic item in that is ammonium. So I thought that's where I kind of got confused. I don't understand why that's necessarily a bad thing if you're still able to use that to an extent in fertilizer. Why don't you maybe potentially distill it and utilize, if you're going to potty train the cows, use it to distill out that particular mineral or whatever. I'm not sure what ammonium is. Is it just a
Well, it's an
chemical?
ammonia form. It's NH3 is ammonia,
So it's
nitrogen,
a chemical
hydrogen
compound.
compound. It's
Okay.
compound.
So
But
you
then you
take
may
that out and then have water and that, and you can use that for fertilizer. That's how I kind of saw that.
right. Well, see, to me, here we are again. We are making a problem that doesn't necessarily exist, and we're going to create a solution for it. It's more of the same.
Mm-hmm.
And this is in Germany, where this was at.
So I couldn't quite understand. I have the article up over here. Uh, I didn't understand if it was in Germany or New Zealand, but they were scientists
In both
from.
places.
So here it says Langbine is from the Institute. I'm assuming that's one of the scientists. Is from the Institute of Behavioral Psychology. Physiology, behavioral physiology in Dummersdorf, Germany, which teamed up with the Germany's National Institute for Animal Health and the University of Auckland in New Zealand to conduct a study. But it doesn't say where this study, and maybe I'm just missing it. But yeah, it doesn't say where the actual study occurred. So I'm assuming either New Zealand or Germany. New Zealand is also known for its beef production.
Right.
They're actually where Butcher
A lot
Box
of
comes from. So
a lot of
it's a high possibility it's from New Zealand.
well, and they've got a lot of sheep. New Zealand sheep is a
Mm-hmm.
big deal. I mean, I think
Mm-hmm.
when I think New Zealand, I think more their sheep than their cattle.
Yeah, that's probably accurate.
But regardless, let's break this down a little bit. They assert that the high ammonia is the main thing that they're talking about, right? Or
Yeah,
ammonia
they're saying
compounds.
that's the biggest issue with the environmental impact in terms of beef for this particular article that we're talking about.
Okay, they're making that assertion, but have they done any test plots with different numbers of cattle on a certain acreage and a control group, a control plot. What have they done anything like that along? They're just making the assumption that it's bad.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, it doesn't have. This is a
Yeah.
4 minute. They tout at the beginning. It's a 4 minute read. So it's a quick article, very short. It came out on the 17th of September, so 2 days ago actually. But it kind of leads to the other article we're going to discuss. But I don't want to get there. But I'll just kind of throw this out there for a second. Is it, trying to get profitability while reducing environmental impact. It's through the NCBA and stuff like that. The stuff in that article, which is what we'll talk next, talks about looking at higher carcass weight with less emission or less impact. Well, much like you're saying right there, carcass weight's easy to measure, right? Because you throw them on the scale and you're okay. This is what it is. How do you measure the environmental impact? Like for example, we take this last year, it's been drought ridden,
Right.
and suddenly you compare that to next year. Let's say everything's hunky dory next year and we get record rainfall and everything works really well. We have massive production both in crops and hay and then also in livestock. Okay, well then in the retrospect, we're going to say, oh yeah, everything improved because we did the XYZ. Well, not necessarily. It was that year before, Mother Nature just wasn't having it, and suddenly this year things turned out. So how are you able to measure that acreage, like you're saying, that plotting? Like what was the process in trying to gather that information?
Well, and you're exactly right. I think what you're alluding to is the variability between years or between areas. And there's several issues there. One is, do you have anything that's competing for that grass?
Right.
Like this year for us, we've had on our winter pasture, we've had massive grasshoppers and they just have wiped us out. There are grasshoppers actually on some of the lease we've got, but not like the numbers because they just don't like the native grass compared to that improved grass. So even there, you've got a couple of things. They've got really hot temperatures this summer, plus a competitor, which is a pest, the grasshoppers. Our calves are going to be probably about, I'm guessing, 25 pounds lighter per head when we take them to market at the same time. So you couple that with now the amount of rain you get. If you get a lot of rain and it's cool, yeah, that grows some grass. But the grass does like it cooler. But if you have a really fast growth, let's say the grass is in perfect growing temperature and you get a lot of water, you get lots of rain and you get a lot of deep grass, that grass isn't necessarily as high protein as a shorter grass is. That's why your mountain pastures, people who have grazing leases up there, it's a place to put them, and they survive, they do okay, they gain some weight, but they don't gain like they do on the bottom because the amount of moisture that's there is high enough that you don't get the protein. You get more growth in there, but you don't get the real good punch in that grass that you get on your prairie grasses. So you got water is one thing, with what is the type of grass. The only way you could really do that is to feed them whatever it is so that you got the equal amounts of protein, carbos, everything in that grass is in the form of hay, and you put that out on a test plot, but then you're not using the grasses. So you really aren't using your own science to properly do it. You can't make a control. So that if you, now the one thing you could do is have different plots of ground with these animals on there, test your soils, and then I don't know how you would do that because you're not completely covering the ground with cow shit. I mean, you just don't. Yeah. Not on a pasture. You got clumps here and there, patties all over the place. And after they pee and it dries out, you can't really find that necessarily. So what do we do when we actually use our where the cows, well, where we feed, I feed purposely in rows and strips so that when they're standing on, and a cow's nasty, they'll stand right on the feed they're eating and poop right on it.
Yeah.
And I mean, they're just nasty animals. But when we're done at the end of the spring, we're harrowing that stuff up. We're breaking it up and breaking it up into the ground, and acts like a natural fertilizer. So destroying it, no, we're not making an impact on it. If you're going to talk about impact, environmentally, I think the thing to really look at is the numbers you run.
Yeah, I
What's the
agree with that.
density? What's your carrying capacity of your ground? Are you exceeding that? Are you damaging that? Now you look at any water hole where cows are at, and that's a high impact area. If there's
Well,
not a creek running through some, and even a little spring or a creek will have a higher impact because they're on that water and the greener grass all the time.
that was another point that I thought was important, because the we've talked about this before in the shorter platforms, is like in the shoot and I think ag shorts. The impact on the ground, especially when it comes to cattle, is significantly higher closer to water source,
Mhm.
particularly if there is no actual grass growing, where you're talking about a creek or a spring or maybe a river, something that has growth immediately next to it. It can still kind of support it through that water. Whereas
Correct.
if you simply have a well in the middle of a pasture, it turns to dirt very much, very quickly around that particular water source. And then they have to start going, it forces them to then go out. The cows are
Right.
so lazy that they just don't want to move, understandably so. So when it comes to measuring, like you're talking about with a plot, if you were to measure near that water source, either one, it doesn't matter, you're going to have a higher impact environmentally, so to speak. One may say that it's absolutely desolate and there's nothing available because all you're picking up is dirt. The other would just say it's been overgrazed, or it's right at perfect or something like that. Whereas if you go further in the pasture away from those sources, it's also there might be no or negligible impact because the cattle simply have not traveled that far. So trying to get the in between, you could plot out a corner or a section within the pasture, but if you're not accommodating or at least um, keeping in mind both extremes, it's intellectually dishonest to say that you're having an overgraze or an undergraze based off of where you're looking.
Correct. Absolutely right. And the other part of that is that I haven't mentioned yet is, well, I kind of did. You did taking soil samples, and what you brought up with your fertilizers.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know that that ground's not depleted of some of the nitrogens that it needs?
Right.
Most you rotate crops because of nitrogen fixing, and alfalfa, for instance, or your legumes are nitrogen fixers. So they put nitrogen in the ground. There's also, similarly, some of your ammonias, you have to have some of that thing. Now, too much is bad of anything. So they're making the assumption that it's a perfect balance for whatever they're growing in the first place. That's a bad assumption. You can't assume things. You have to test things. You have to verify things when you're going to do any kind of a experiment using the scientific method of, is my theory going to hold true? Well, you have to take all those variables again, and then now you're going into some of the things that you can't control completely, but you can measure, and that is measurable with what kind of stuff is in the soil. Am I high in ammonia? Am I high in
Right.
my nitrates? All of those kinds of things like that. So, and your grasses change depending on what's in there, and that's the whole point of, like you brought up with fertilizers, trying to bring that balance. What do you want this grass to do? Do you want it to grow tall? Are you trying to establish roots? What are you trying to do with that? And they can make and formulate your nitrogen, or I'm sorry, your fertilizers to do just exactly that. You can make it do what you want. You can add ammonias, have none in it. It's all kind of a moot point, really. To me, what is a solution to any kind of a overabundance of something in nature? Let's say you got too much cow poop laying on your pastures. What's going to happen? It's going to get broke up, especially when we do it by a harrow method, dragging
Right.
an implement behind there to break roots up. stimulate growth in that and rhizomatous growth in those plants. Spread the fecal matter out a little bit. The urine you're not going to do anything about, but you do also get it diluted with rainfall, and that's part of what goes down into your soil bank as well. So to me, this sounds like just really bad science. It's not even science. It's, you know, trying to do something to prove that, oh yeah, we've got too many cows, we need to get rid of them. So
I do find it comical, and here's what I think maybe would be an interesting analysis. They talked about environmental impact. That's the reason why. That's the reason why, or the push behind why they tried to potty train these cows. Right. Realistically speaking, let's say the government starts mandating things and adding additional regulations and such. Let's say we have to abide by it. And we do our best to say, okay, we'll actually do everything we can to support this, make sure that the cows figure it out after the training, because that's going to be a process on its own. How realistic would it be and costly do you think it would be to do that? Because my initial thoughts are the calves, you have to teach them as calves. They will have to have multiple locations to leave behind urine or fecal matter, because there will have to be collection points. How do you set those collection points up in the pastures? How are you supposed to collect all of the stuff and what responsibly get rid of it, dispose of it? Those are all serious logistical questions that at a certain point, where does the cost benefit really come in? And I don't see any. Let's say that this is actually a perfect idea. Everybody supports it. It's great. It's wonderful. But at what point does the cost outweigh the benefit? And I don't see, even assuming everybody is on the same side saying this is beneficial, I don't see where the cost overcomes that.
Yeah, that was one of my other questions. What's your ROI, right? Return on investment. How are you going to make that? What are you going to spend your time doing? Watching cattle and is just to enforce that they're going to go to their training ground to go take a dump? Right. That is not happening. And you know, dogs are very, very intelligent, extremely intelligent. You can train a dog to leave the house. You don't necessarily train them where to go. Sometimes you can. I mean, that's not that hasn't happened in some of the smaller areas. You know, they have a little mat out there, right? You know, like indoor outdoor carpet where they go and do their thing, and then you go pick up after them. And I'm sure that's happened a lot in a lot of places where they have minimal amount to go. Our dogs, you let them out, they'll ask to go outside because you've trained them to do that, but they're very intelligent. You let them out. Do we care where they go?
No.
As long as they're, you know, wherever they're going to go, just, you know, try not to do this on the deck or on the stairway here, you know, or the walkway, you know, and they don't. They usually go out on the grass. Now, that's a very intelligent animal. Cows are not as intelligent as dogs. I think we can argue
I pointed out.
with nobody disagreeing, right? Yeah. So how many times have you seen a cow all of a sudden, I mean, they're so spontaneous. They're looking at you and then all of a sudden they just hump up and pee. It's like, oh, hey, I got this feeling. Yeah. Or they'll poop, or they'll be grazing and they're just pooping along. You know, they don't necessarily go to a spot like a dog does. And some dogs will do that. You know, they'll find their favorite little bush that they like to pee on. So that does not happen with a cow. I mean, they are so spontaneous. Horses, the same. What happens when you start moving an animal? Now, let's say that you've got a place for them to go and you say, oh, that cow looks like she's going to have to go take a dump. I better go out there and make sure she goes there. The minute you start moving her very far, guess what she does? She starts taking a dump. I mean, that's just a biological function of a working system. Horses, we do it all the time with. We don't work our horses until we've walked them out for a while. They take a dump. They're relaxing. Okay. You're going to prevent a lot of intestinal issues there, perhaps, and can prevent colic, gut pain. Let them poop. And that was a rule we had as a little kid. And I've done the same with you guys. Just something old guys learn from being on horses for centuries. Walk that horse. When they poop, Now you can speed them up. You can get into an intermediate gait. When they poop again, now you can lope them. And so 2 to 3 good poops, and you're good to go. Now, some of these horses will do this right off the bat. I had one that horse with no name. You could almost drive a perimeter out there, and in 200 yards from stepping on him, he's pooping. I mean, it was very interesting. I've never had a horse quite like that. I mean, it was like 200 yards, and it was eliminating. So when you move an animal like that, a cow especially, they're going to poop. They just do it. And you know what? They don't stand and put a nice little spot in one area where it's easy to clean up. They will string that out for however long it takes, and as they're walking. So this is, I think, bad science. It's more like a propaganda premise that, hey, we've got this problem. Now we're going to solve this. Now let's say that it works. Let's say, okay, let's argue that this is working, just like you're alluding to earlier. How are you going to do that with, say, for us, we hover around that 100 pair number. You're going to spend all of your time out there enforcing this, and what if they don't do it? Then what are you going to do?
And that's where just
it's impractical.
It's impossible. Yeah. If you were now, let's say you were talking about a little bit with dairies or hogs and stuff like that. They're more confined.
Feedlots.
Yeah, feedlots. And feedlots are actually, I would argue, a better one, because if you put a cement pad underneath the whole structure, and then you put topsoil and everything above that, and then you collect it over time, and then dispose of it and place new topsoil, that's a method. And I think it's probably safer, because I remember Mom was telling me the local feedlot where the school is, they had to, like, the EPA, I think, said something about how the ground was damaged for a certain depth because of the feedlot and stuff like that. So it's like, I get that. Like, right. It's understandable. So then they have to clear that part of the ground out and reclaim it. And
that's been there for 60 years.
Right. But that took 60 years to get there.
Right.
And that's where, if you're going to use something like this, maybe a cement pad and collection systems or processes are better. But for a free range, open range type, it's not feasible. That's my point. Return on investment, like you're saying, it's not there. Realistically, I don't think you can apply it. How are you going to measure it? There's just so many different things that go into that, and it's just it'll drive. This is also a business. It's not just who we are. It's a business, and so business at end of things, this is not worth our time or investment or anything like that.
Well, and the other part of that is the picture they're painting is that fecal matter just sits there. If you look at any feedlot, or even us with a set of corrals where we feed our heifers or our replacement heifers for a couple of months while we wean, and then in the calving season, I've got bred heifers that I'm calving, and I keep them in that same area. They're not together at different times. All of that builds up, and actually, what builds up more than anything is the damn hay they waste at a feeder. So but you're still picking up crap, and I'm scooping it in a pile. You look at any feedlot, what they're doing, they're continually keeping those corrals cleaned out,
right?
And they pile it up. Guess what they do with it?
They spread it
with a manure spreader. And guess where they spread it?
On the feed that they end up producing, so that they can continue to feed those animals later. Yeah, it's a circle. It's the recycling from the original days.
Yes, it's like so their premise is got all kinds of holes in it. They want you to believe now I did not read the article. You read the article. I'm depending on what you told me. Yeah. But from what you're reading or relating to me is, they're really not talking about what really happens in the real world. They're grasping onto okay, we've got this problem. This is how we're going to solve it. You might be able to potty train a half a dozen calves, but you're going to keep them in a fairly small area, and it's going to be a confined area, just like a feedlot, and they're going to go to a corner. Now, one of the cleanest animals, believe it or not, in confinement is a hog. They will go to a certain spot, and they will poop in an area. It's amazing. They are hogs get a bad rap for being dirty and laying in mud. Well, they do that because they've got no sweat glands. That's how they stay cool. But when you're talking about where they poop and pee, they will pick a spot and they will all go there. It's amazing. They are very clean animals. Hell, they're cleaner than our dogs are.
Yeah.
At least they're not rolling around in it once they poop. And, I mean, it's incredible. So there's a lot of misinformation and a lot of, call it wives' tales or whatever about what's clean and what's not, and what's intelligent, and what's not. I think a hog is as intelligent, maybe more intelligent than a dog. They're very, very close.
Yeah,
Hogs
definitely.
are very smart. Yeah.
Now
Anyway,
moving on to the second part of this, the NCBA, losing more and more faith in them every day. They had a beef sustainability presentation in Nashville in early August, which gave 3 focuses. This is a summary of an article that covered that particular presentation. So, a recent environmental life cycle assessment of the beef life cycle. That is, for those that don't understand, it's the pasture to plate lifetime. Stated emissions from cattle production is 3.7%. This also includes feed grown, like we were talking about with feedlots, as well as fuel and electricity use. So you're thinking what it takes to run equipment, machinery, things like that to move the animals, feed the animals, and such. US beef produces 18% of the world's beef, using only 6% of the world's cattle, which is amazing, while maintaining the lowest carbon footprint of any country. That is in the article. And I think that's an amazing thing. We've talked about that before, but the point provided was that there's room for improvement with the environment and the cow-calf sector, which is us, because it accounts for 70% of that environmental footprint, that carbon footprint that they're talking about. The impact is measured by dividing carcass weight from the animal's emissions, and that's what we were discussing earlier. The next 3 points were where producers can save money and reduce the impacts to the environment. So in a sense, it's a win-win, or at least that's the presentation. The first point was increase the carcass weight produced. Yep, all about it. That's what we're all about, because that proves our profitability at the end of the year. Number 2, improve feed efficiency. Yep, absolutely. Less stuff for us to buy means less money out, and we're still able to get that high weight gain. That's great.
well,
Then
and
number
if
3,
you have that efficiency, you can actually run more cattle per acre.
right. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
So,
Which moves on to the point 3, manage pastures wisely. Absolutely, because we are here not only to use the ground, but then also to take care of it, because then we're going to use it the next year. What we will discuss is the reality of making some of those 3 outline changes. So I'll throw this out there. The first point, it actually put managing pastures wisely and increasing that carcass weight kind of in the same blurb. So I'll just go through that. It says quick weight gain to minimize forage and get the biggest weight for the amount of time used. Yeah, got it. That makes sense. But my issue was, I'm not sure how you make an animal grow faster. Terminal crossbreeding can increase wean weights by 10%, but it can also lead to 6.5% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. I think based off of the reading I had from that, it reduces the emissions because you get that weight gain that is desired quicker through that terminal crossbreeding, and which over time that reduces the emissions because the animal will be moved on to the next thing after that.
okay,
Cattlemen,
let me digest that a little bit.
yeah,
Dad joke. So what they're talking about, if I hear this correctly, is through what we've talked about before, heterosis. All you're doing is you're breeding for efficiency.
Yep.
Okay, because what we're talking about terminal. All that means is slaughter animal. For those that don't know. Okay, so when you're using your crossbreeding to come up with a more efficient animal that has less emissions, and this whole emissions thing just drives me crazy.
But that's the problem that I'm fundamentally in these arguments. This is the problem that I'm having with it, and this is what we just talked about: is carcass weight measurable. Got it. Hey, I did this year. This next year, I did a crossbreeding with this specific breed to get more weight on my calves within that same amount of time. So I have had these calves for 7 months. They were at 500 pounds. Now I can average, I gained 50 pounds. Now they're at 550 over that exact same time and everything. So that makes sense to me. But how that's how you measure the carcass weight, but how do you measure their greenhouse emissions? I don't know. Like that doesn't make sense to me.
Well, that's the problem. That is exactly the problem. Now, will different foods or different forages cause different amounts of their greenhouse gas? See, this again, this is the premise. So if you have just a plain, let's say a native grass, just plain native grass diet, how much methane is a cow burping and farting? That's measurable. I don't either.
Know. You're gonna have to, you'll have to have that particular animal
right
measured, followed for X amount of days, hours, whatever. And
okay, now take a look at that same animal eating alfalfa hay. Okay, so how much emissions are going to come off of that from the change of feed? It's going to be significant. It's going to be different.
It will, partly because now you have to also accommodate in the argument the use of the emissions to produce the hay.
Hey, we have a guest who's talking about grasses.
I have things. Oh, he's not in the picture.
He's here he is.
But my point is, I can't.
Come on over.
My point is though to do that. Yeah, he's not gonna get in the camera.
He won't.
My point though is you've gone from a grass, which may be natural. It may have been supplemented every decade or so with seeding and whatnot. That's minimal. But then you've now created hay, which hay in itself creates emissions, right? Because you've had to cut it with a machine. You've now had to put it together with a machine. You've now had to haul it with a machine. And now you have had to take that same item and move it from the haystack to the cattle. So
well, you may have used water, electricity to grow the hay.
Right. That's a good point too. Yep.
You know, I mean, so you got electricity there or some power source. So my point is you have a comparative analysis there between native grass and one cow, and take that same cow and now you're feeding them a steady diet of a high protein alfalfa. Well, let's take a look at what our grasses are what, 13%, 13% protein. What is a dairy quality hay for a dairy cow to produce milk? You're up there around 26%. You're doubling the amount of protein in there. Interesting.
Okay.
Right. Okay, let's take a look at this. If you want to go down this road of what do we eliminate, what do we keep, this is something that could be very controversial. And you want to talk about diet. What is it the girls don't do that boys do? They fart.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Ever eat beans?
Yep.
Yeah, what happens with that? High protein bean. What does that do to your system? Okay, maybe we've got some cultures that eat lots of beans. Maybe we should eliminate those cultures. Those people shouldn't be allowed to live on this earth. Because
it's also the same thing with you change your diet drastically. Yeah, it does the same thing because the gut bacteria now has to change to accommodate what you now.
Exactly right. That's what I'm saying about these cattle on a comparative grazing basis. How do you do that? And that's going to change from year to year. That's going to change from throughout the year, whether they're doing natural grazing with fast growing grass in the spring, to which we change our mineral to match that. Those supplements that are in the grass, or the mineral in the grass. And then in the fall, after that, or midsummer, when that grass is cured, it's an entirely different type of forage form, and how their bodies can take that. Then you take them with a snow covered area where they can't graze that much, and now you're feeding them hay that we have purchased or produced that is entirely different again from what you have just put them through from spring to fall, up to that point where you're going to graze or supplement feed throughout the winter. So it all changed. What are you going to do? Not feed them what they need?
Right. Well, and then you've got waste in itself. But the
so other part, feed them at all, and they die, and then they don't have any kind of gas emissions at all, except for putrefaction of a carcass.
Which actually, going back to the conversation we had a couple weeks ago about Oregon's IP13, about they have to go all the way through their lifetime and die naturally.
Right.
These two very different arguments coming from the same side are very hypocritical of the other, because one is trying to
that.
reduce emissions, whereas if you lengthen the time of the animal's life, it's gonna make more emissions. So I just find that curious. But
Well, the
the
end
other
point
thing
of it is,
too,
yeah, but
go
the
ahead.
end point of both of it in the long run is that you have a reduction in those number of animals.
Right. Yeah. No, I
But
get that.
they're the short-sightedness of it. Well, if you can't slaughter, you're going to have a balloon of these animals. Now, what do? You just don't breed them, and in one generation, 2 generations, you've got no animals left. Is that the
Right.
correct answer? You spay and neuter your cows.
Yeah. Um, the other thing too is, so I looked at the article because this is a very confusing one for me. And when I get confused with something that should be pretty black and white, I get frustrated. It says weaning rate. And after weaning rate, it says cattlemen can sell 2% more calves by using weaning strategies to get healthy calves to market and reduce loss.
Okay.
I don't understand that. How do you get 2% more calves? You're still assuming that you're not going to have cows or calves die from disease or anything like that,
Well,
or a predator. I'm
are they
not quite
talking?
sure what they're saying here.
What are they saying? Numbers, or I assume it's weight gain.
It says sell 2% more calves by using weaning strategies to get healthy calves to market and reduce loss.
Okay, so they're talking about loss, because 2% is a acceptable loss, or kind of a standard loss, right?
Yeah.
So what they're talking about is maybe, and I don't know, I don't know if I'm reading this right at all
That's
either,
where I
but
wish I would have
is
been
if
to
you
the
do these
thing.
things, if you watch these and take care of your animals, you're going to reduce your loss. So it's about some strategies there, and then giving them the
Maybe.
correct supplements, maybe making sure they stay healthy,
Well, and
water
that's another
sources,
one too.
which is
That's the
stuff you do
next.
anyway.
Yeah, but the next one too is, says calf implants. I was like, what's a calf implant? So some quick asking Uncle Google said that it's hormones and drugs
Mhm.
from, again, the limited information I found, which can increase wean weights, sorry, by
Weaning rate.
5%. So that's a significant increase for cattle with 5%. But again, when we're talking grass fed or hormone uh infused, there's a very big difference. And maybe it's who's the applicator, because I know you said that we tried that before in the past and it just didn't, there wasn't much gain for it. There wasn't the ROI that we were looking for.
No.
But the other thing too is long long term, I'm not convinced that adding hormones to your food is necessarily good.
Well,
So
yeah, I don't know. I don't know, because here's the argument on one side of this, and this is also basically the same argument for, and I had a medical microbiology professor in college. He was a huge proponent of food. How can I put this? It was about food preservation through nuclear means. In other
okay.
words, you got a rail car of packaged food that's coming out of wherever they're doing it. You name the company that does TV dinners. Let's say that,
Yeah.
okay? As abhorrent as eating a TV dinner is, but anyway, people do.
Hey, I
And
had to
you take
survive on
a,
those the last 3 months, so calm down.
I know you, I know you did, yeah. But you take a pill or a small size um, piece of irradiating type material, whatever it
Okay.
is, and you expose this rail car of it, and the radiation kills any bacteria
Hmm.
in that
Okay.
in the and now this was his argument 30 years ago. He goes, it doesn't change the meat, it doesn't change the structure of the potato or vegetable or whatever's in that. It kills whatever's going to eat on that. And that's all that is happening with any kind of a food stuff when it goes bad, is you've got some bacteria in there that's starting to chew on it, whether it's aerobic or anaerobic, depending on what you've got going on. So if you irradiate it, you're just killing the bacteria. You're not changing the meat or that food substance. And like, okay,
But
that's
nuclear
his
also
argument.
has things that are there. You have remnants. That's where
Right.
I get
Well,
concerned, and that's
and
kind of
that's
where
what
I'm
he was talking
getting.
about. And that's what he was talking about was, and that was brought up. So, well, wait a minute, what's the half-life on some of the stuff? And he goes, well, there's some
Yeah.
that are just half-life is gone. It's eliminated really almost within hours. And in some cases, by the time it gets to a consumer, there's nothing left at all. So you're not changing what people are eating. Now, that's the one side of the argument. The other side of the argument is, how do you know that?
Yeah.
How do you know
Have
that
you
that's
tested
not
it?
hanging in there? Right. And so
Yeah.
this is the same argument really with the hormones. And we started doing the product was Ralgrow, and I'm sure it's still around. I don't even pay attention to it because we don't use it.
Yeah.
We just didn't see a return. And in those days, it was about anything you can do to make these calves gain weight faster. It's all about the weight gain so that you can get them to, either your broker or you get them into an auction yards
Well, and
and
that's what
sell
the
them. So
argument for this is too, is just find ways to
yeah,
get more weight and
it's
using
the
less
same.
pasture. Yeah.
Yeah, we're talking Jesus, 45 years later, and
Right.
you're still doing this. Now it was new, and you just laid that implant underneath the skin of the ear, and it would slowly dissolve into the bloodstream. So that was a time release, slow, but there, so that the weight gain was real and marketable, and it was maximized until the time that you sold your calves. We did not see over a couple of years a big change in our calves. Just didn't. It just, not for the money you put into them. Now,
Right.
the one thing I don't remember is the environmental differences. What kind of years did we have those years? Mid 70s were pretty good for some water. There were some dry years too, but was that part of it? I don't know. It wasn't very dang scientific on our part, right? And I was pretty small about it. Didn't have, that kind of mind at the time, cause and effect. Certainly grandpas and dad, I mean, they're smart men. They're very smart.
I would say one way to do it is you take one half of the herd and just choose.
There you go. You got a control group.
See what
right?
happens. It's the same year, same pasture, everything. Yeah. See what happens.
But when you are buying that and you're going, you know what, this is going to help us. We're going to do this. You're not going to use a control group,
right?
Because you're going to try to maximize, and that's part of the issue. That's why your experiment stations that are ran by like USDA, those are very, very good sources of information, provided everything is non-political, because there's the politics creep into that as well.
Now they also got in here though. We're talking wean times too, because that's part of this of getting that gain. They also said wean calves 2 months earlier, which to me, I was like, okay, I can get it for a drought, because especially drought, pulling animals off the ground faster, stuff like that. But like weaning 2 months earlier to me just seems so drastic. I don't know
2
how much
months is, 45 days is kind of a standard, really. But here's also the issue. Every day that calf is not on its mother eating milk, and believe me, we got some of these calves that are 600-700 pounds. They're still on their mothers. If she's producing milk, they're gaining weight on that. But there's the argument that they want them ready to go on grass. Okay, fine. Whose grass? Our grass, or whoever it gets sold to? They're weaned. They're going on grass no matter what, and they've been on grass. Now they're just going on grass full time. What does a calf look like after it's been weaned for 45 days?
It's get like a big pot belly, doesn't it?
Pot bellied, you bet. They absolutely. I mean, that's a stressful time for them. They get pot bellied. Do they look good? Nope, not near as good as something that's fresh off a cow. So you get some whatever you are trying to market to some of the buyers, and this is particularly true when you go through a public auction yard. You don't have a face-to-face private treaty deal. They say, oh yeah, these calves are ready to go. They're 45 days, 60 days. Yes, to me is excessive. That's a couple extra weeks is a long time.
Yeah.
That you've weaned these calves. So they're asking for calves that are ready to go right on grass. They've been weaned. But when they look at them and they go through the ring, you can tell, these calves have been weaned. They look ratty and they don't pay for them. They look, oh, these calves don't look good. and you send some through that are just right off the cow the day before or that morning, and they're gone into that sale ring, and they're fleshy and they're fat and they are roly-poly and look healthy. And even sometimes, I mean, that one year we brought a bunch of cows in there, and a guy you went to school with was a few years older, was the auctioneer, and he goes, "Whoa, look at these!" And they were ours, and they looked good, really good. I mean, I was sitting there smiling, and you know what? They brought that year higher than most, because a lot of these guys were asking for weaned calves that don't look as good. It's all about the presentation there too, but these guys know what they're doing too.
And that goes to the profitability that we keep talking about.
Right.
But then
Right.
another thing they said, which threw me kind of for a loop, because it's also something that we definitely don't do. It says reducing a cow's body size can reduce emissions by 6%, also requires 8% less water. Looking for small cows with a large calf production. Why? Because average cow longevity in the United States is 6 to 9 years. So I get that. I completely understand the argument, understand why, but what's the reason why we often leave the heifers an extra year is so that they can get bigger, they have better development. And when you start breeding cow sizes to get smaller, I begin to worry about potential loss, especially when you're breeding to get a cow smaller, but the calf larger. So you're going to have a smaller birth canal, but a larger calf. You're asking for 2 watermelons to go through a hose versus 1.
Right.
Like, there's more potential for issues and long-term results. Maybe that suddenly that cow longevity, it's not going to be 6 to 9 years. Maybe it's going to be 4 to 6, 4 to 7. It's
well, and yeah. So you're talking two different things here that are not unrelated.
Yeah.
Well, or though they're not unrelated though.
Yeah.
When you're talking about size, everybody went with, for a while, boy, we want these big, large cows. We want meat production and having large calves, and crossing them with certain breeds, it would be a lot bigger. But the price to pay for that is you may tear your cow up in birth. You're exactly right. So some herds and some people stuck with that, a moderately sized cow. So if you can do the most efficient thing you could is have a cow the size of a German Shepherd, and she has a calf, and that calf grows up to be 600 pounds. Yeah, that would be efficient. Impractical as hell, because it ain't gonna happen. I mean, you're right. Now, and I've had this conversation with a couple of vets. I'm like, look, we've got a couple of cows here that are pretty dang big, and yes, they're going to eat more. They're more inefficient. You're going to put more into them. Why would I do that? And the vet looked at me and she goes, if she's weaning a calf half the size of her weight, who cares?
Yeah.
She's thinking production. She's also thinking and terminal production too, or not even terminal, but going to grass. So somebody's buying these stocker cattle, our feeder cattle. So that also is a mindset. Yes, you can have moderate sized cows and be more efficient, but your breeding that you are trying to achieve, you want those bulls. In our case, mostly the bulls that you're controlling, because you've already got the cows, is trying to get that high weaning weight ratio at the end. So yeah, right. Smaller, moderate size calf at birth, and then just that fast gain. That's why that one bull here a couple of years ago, actually it was Joe Goggins was the auctioneer on that somewhere, and that bull went for over $1 million because his EPDs and what he had produced, and he was a young bull. I mean, they were going to just collect semen on him. That's all. Right. That was his job. But over $1 million for that bull, because the genetics were right for that high gain at the end. And you know what? If you own that bull and you're set up for it and you're going to collect like that, that bull is going to bring you profit in a short time.
Worth his weight.
Keep him alive. Got to keep him alive. So
now, I want to finish with this though, because we got just over 5 minutes. The final part was the improvement of feed efficiency, which we talked about, and I'll just throw everything out real quick. The NCBA claims cattlemen can increase 10% of its energy by improving feed efficiencies. Okay. Increased fiber digestion can lead to 4% methane reduction, and then reducing water footprint of corn and its byproducts by 10% can assist the bank in good old Mother Nature. So I was like, I don't know. From our end, there's not much we can do there because we can't increase maybe increase energy efficiency with the use of the feed like we're talking about with the animals and stuff like that, but we can't increase fiber. That's on the farmer or the grower. And also reducing water footprint. Based off what they said with the body size, that getting a smaller cow, they require 8% less water. Okay, got it. But they're talking specifically feed though. Like that, I don't understand why they're talking to the beef producers on feed in that terms when most of them are focused on the livestock. That needs to be something more towards anybody who's supporting the livestock growers with corn, silage, anything like that.
Okay, did I miss who are they targeting? The feedlots, or are they targeting the cow calf producer? Because you're right, a cow calf.
Yeah, based off of what I'm reading, they're saying cattlemen. Cattlemen can get a 10% increase. So I'm like, that's where I was.
What does that mean?
Yeah. So if you're a feedlot, that makes sense. I've got a production process for the growth of the stuff, then the animal, and so on and so forth. But if it's us, that has nothing to do with us. We are only livestock.
And I think that's and cattleman is a very, very broad term.
Yeah.
Because I know guys that what they do is they produce seed stock. They're matching cows and bulls to produce young bulls. They don't want heifers if they could, or as many heifers. Their bread and butter is producing bulls for resale. They're still cattlemen. They're not butchering these animals, they're using them for seed stock. And so they're keeping some replacement heifers, a few, but the majority they want are these bulls out of these animals. So they're still cattlemen. Now they can also use some of the techniques for feeding that they are also doing in feedlots, but these efficiency numbers and these data that they're using is probably from places like feedlots, like experiment stations, where they are tightly controlling what they're doing and measuring that. I mean, the emissions, how can you measure that as well? See, this just smells to me like you've got more environmentalists moving into some of these areas and trying to make a statement or change policy or change the way we do things through a back door.
Well, and I think the important part probably to take away from this hour conversation is the things that are proposed, not only with the potty training the calves, but then also what they said. The article I was just talking about for the last half hour was from Kansas Farmer, farmprogress.com. It's the same stuff we already do, I guess, is what the root of this whole conversation should be, is we already do these things. We have these things in our head. What we're trying to do, increase carcass weight, reduce efficiencies, or maximize efficiencies, reducing any extra stuff that we're doing, because we also, to make more profit or to provide, even get a profit on a year like this, is to minimize all that stuff. It's all about getting rid of all the little tiny things that dime and nickel and dime you everywhere. And so I don't disagree with what they're saying, but I also agree with what you've explained, is the use of the environment as an excuse to kind of move in on us is very concerning, and something that I think everybody needs to be aware of, because this may have long-term effects. We talk Packers all the time. Yep, I got it again. Another episode. we talk Packers, but this is part of that chain, because it's all tied together, and that's what could relate to the consumer on the back end having to pay even more than they already do today.
Right. What's the easiest way to change any group of something? Is to make that change from within, right? It's a lot easier than to be on the outside, because then you have more of a contentious type relationship or adversarial type relationship in how to change things. So if you can do that from within, and that's a lesson been well learned in politics, in anything that you make those changes from within, you can make them faster and sustain them. And to me, that's all this is. Who's paying for some of these studies?
I don't know. It's a good question, though.
I'm
Good
saving
question.
that for the last. I'm saving that
Right.
for the last, because if you want to know really what the purpose of some research is, see who funded it,
Yeah, who's the backer?
who's the backer.
All right. With that, we appreciate everybody sticking around. Thank you.
You're stealing my line.
No, I'm not gonna do it. Thank you. Like, comment, subscribe. Honestly, we are here to do everything as efficiently as possible while still also trying to maximize what we get from it as well. So with that, I'll give it to Dad.
We love the comments, by the way, too.
Yeah,
Some of them are negative, but you know what? It's okay, because it points out what people don't know, and maybe we need to do a little bit better job of explaining it, or you can go pound sand because you're an idiot. So with that, we thank you till you're better paid.